We're here today really to talk about the journey and question of female fund managers, and really to explore what MIT and the corporation can do in leading the way of investing in women fund managers, and can we maybe even set a standard for elite universities around the country and globe around how we can do this so it has a 21st century approach, which I always think means action. I feel like the 21st century is around show me your receipts, and we're going to talk about how do we get some receipts here at MIT. We have a wonderful panel joining us today, and before I jump into introduce them and have them introduce themselves, I also want to say that this is a conversation for all of us. So please feel free, share reactions, throw things in chats. Let's try to make as much energy in this room as possible. So first, I'd like to introduce Noramay and have her say a couple of words about her impressive bio.
Hello, everyone. Noramay Cadena. I'm based in Los Angeles. I started my career at MIT as an undergrad, studying mechanical engineering after being luckily tapped on the shoulder and introduced to engineering by a current MIT student. I spent over a decade in the aerospace sector and jumped into venture capital in 2015 because I found it to be the perfect intersection between innovation and community building. I built up a small firm and I'm now in the process of building up my second venture firm, investing in what we call the changing face of food. So really at the early stages, an intersection of food, culture, and technology. So undergrad in mechanical engineering, and then I went through the LGO program, Leaders for Global Operations, and graduated in 2011. Great to meet you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Celi, please.
Hi, it's great to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. My name is Celi Khanyile-Lynch. I am a recent grad of MIT Sloan MBA class of 2020. Past 5 years before Sloan, I worked for the former governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, and the current mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, in their executive offices as briefing director. I pivoted after business school into sustainable investing in private equity. I'm currently at Wellington Management within their private investment wing, focused on sustainable investing. And prior to that, I was at Morgan Stanley doing similar work. So great to be here. I'm also an entrepreneur myself, so I have these interesting dual perspectives. Green Source, which is based in West Africa and Cameroon, where my stepfather hails from. We focus on providing smallholders with the resources to create sustainably made palm oil while us make a living income.
Thank you. Thank you, Celi. It's great to have you. And also, I just want to say that Wellington had one of the best Pride floats in the last time we were able to do Pride in Boston. And that's the only reason why I know the name, is because I'm like, oh my God, look at their float. And then I was like, who are they? And looked them up. So bravo. Great diversity and inclusion authenticity at Pride. Julianne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julianne Zimmerman. I'm an alumna of class of 88, principally, 16 and 21L, which way back in those days was humanities and literature. And I have been involved in a wide range of sectors. I was an aerospace engineer, a working aerospace engineer in the manned spaceflight sector for the first 14 or so years of my working life. And then I became a co-founder in the clean tech sector before that was really a thing. And I had the great experience of being told that I was a hippie or a communist or just delusional. And since then, I've had all kinds of great experiences working with and sometimes in young growing companies across sectors including water and energy and several others. I co-founded a small seed stage investing practice in the early 20-teens, really because I saw a tremendous range and vibrant community of founders growing up companies that were creating real value propositions in the world with, scalable, profitable enterprises, not getting the attention of the investment community. And I saw that as a tremendous opportunity worthy of attention. And I was invited, as a result of doing that work, I was invited by my now senior partner, Ed Duggar, to join him in launching ReInventure Capital. So we are based here in the Boston area, investing exclusively in US-based companies led and controlled by BIPOC and or female identifying founders at break even and poised to grow profitably. So if you just sort of think through each of those criteria, you'll quickly realize that what we're doing is essentially orthogonal to the mainstream venture community. So a cross product of very nearly zero. And it's wonderful to be here in an audience where I can say things like that. And I know you all know what they mean.
Thank you so much for joining us. And audience, again, thank you. Let's give our panelists a little virtual round of applause, reaction, some love, some hearts, some celebrations. And let's jump into the first question. When we were we weren't sitting around, we can't even sit around anymore. When we were Zooming around, talking about this conversation, one of the things that I was so fascinated by was your journeys, right? Because in some ways they are so unique to who you are, to how you show up in this world and how the world interprets that. But also there seem to be some themes that really have led you to doing the work you do the way you do it now. And Celi, why don't we start with you? Could you just talk to us a little bit about your journey? Did you have to build your own ladder? And what are, a couple of things, I said in the questions, what are 3 things, but you don't have to do 3, that you would tell any woman who wants to get started or who may be, started? What are those 3 lessons that every woman should take with them, and that every ally should know we have to take with us to overcome the bias in order to become your equal?
That's great. Well, boy, is there a ladder. And we have to climb it. It's very steep. And I experienced that firsthand as an entrepreneur at MIT Sloan. And when I was there's a huge ecosystem of entrepreneurship, which everyone here knows. And what's great about that is a lot of my classmates who are fellow entrepreneurs encouraged me to go into entrepreneurship. They said there's vast resources. And so I went into those institutes and funding centers and went in with my startup. And I thought, okay, I'd seen my fellow classmates, white men who were also entrepreneurs, and they told me about the hundreds of thousands of dollars they were able to obtain from pitching as part of these competitions that these institutes have. And so I thought, great, I'm ready. I have a full-fledged business. They had an idea. They didn't even have a proof of concept. Like, I'm ready to go. And yet there was a stark difference in what I was able to get and what they were able to get. And I realized that there was a lot of inequity in the resources and distribution of resources for entrepreneurs. Me being a woman of color was not going to be able to enter a room and get the same amount of funding that my white male counterpart was. And so that was a reality I had to come to terms with, but it also helped me grow some of the skills from them that I realized that they had that allowed them to get there. And number 1 was confidence. Like, they really entered those rooms. They just had their idea, but they were able to convince everyone in that room that their idea was worth $100,000 off the bat. And I was, as a woman, was just waiting until I wanted to make sure I had everything in play. I wanted to make sure my business was fully running before I asked for these amounts. And I realized that I need to get better at how I explain my value proposition. And so that's one recommendation for any entrepreneur out there, is really show up with that confidence in what you're doing. And number two, for those who are interested into going into private equity and venture capital, where you don't see faces like ours in those rooms, a lot of it is networking. So everyone on this Zoom call, these two amazing women in this type of industry, they and I are there for you in terms of reaching out to the network and seeing how we can help provide you with the resources necessary to get involved in this work. Because while there's a lot of initiatives in private equity right now to diversify, we need to hold them accountable, and it takes a village. And so we are here to support you in your journey. So that's number two. And I'll leave it there because I'm sure there's a lot more that I can say. But those were two really informative recommendations that I came out of my experience as an entrepreneur and in private equity.
You know, that confidence is such an important one. In a former life, I was in politics, and we would be encouraging women to run for office. And you saw the age gap, actually. And if you look at it in Congress, you see it as well, where men will run for office much earlier, much younger than women. And we used to joke around and say, you know, men put on a suit and be like, damn, I could be governor. And women are like, oh, I need to start at the PTA, right? And I need to work my way up. And so it's about the confidence internally that then exudes externally. Thank you so much for that point. Julianne, what's some of your journey and some life lessons that would be the first chapters of your book, of your textbook?
Well, first of all, I just want to applaud Celi's comments. I think the thing that I would say is, you know, where there is for sure a kind of typical path to getting into venture. I think what we need to acknowledge is that typical path is really not only paved by and for a very narrow set of people to be successful, but it's also only one path, right? And so when we think about investing, you know, one of the fundamental principles of investing is that you want to diversify your investments and not be over concentrated, right? And so I think one of the things that I find myself encouraging people to do on a routine basis is really be very clear about what your point of view is. Do you have a technology point of view? Do you have an industry point of view? Do you have a sector point of view or geography point of view? Do you have a set of insights? Do you have an investment thesis, or do you have a particular set of experiences that give you actionable insight into what you believe is a compelling investment prospect? And whether that's as a crowd equity investor, you don't have to be somebody who, you know, works at an investment practice to be an investor. You can be an investor. And this goes to your point, Malia, about like echoing Celi's comment about not waiting to sort of earn your way, right? Like, go ahead, act on that insight, right? Everybody on this call is extremely intelligent and sophisticated and highly educated. Every single person on this call. And so I think what I would encourage you to do is recognize that, you know, as you develop your own point of view, that is a qualification, right? And give yourself the opportunity to claim that, to act on your knowledge, your insight, and to build up your own perspective on what is investable and what is, what is a rewarding investment to you. The other thing I would say is I ask founders every time I meet founders, and I ask aspiring investors the same question: what's your definition of success? You know, you could do anything, really, you could do just about anything with your time and the next several years of your life, right? So how will you decide that what you have spent your time and attention on was fully worth that time and attention, that precious chunk of your life? And be really clear about that. The clearer you can possibly be about what you care about and what success will mean to you, the more of that confidence and authentic conviction you will bring to everything you do, and the sharper it will make your questions.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Noramay, what are your lessons? What are your ladders? What are your bridges? What are you leaping over? Sometimes you're like, let me just leap over this right here.
Ropes, ladders, everything. You know, so I'd love to follow up on what both Celi and Julianne said, and I'll start with some of the data. Right, in 2020, according to PitchBook and the NVCA, investors invested over $150 billion into US-based companies, right? Which is something like 420 something million for every single day of the year. And white men continue to get about 98% of this funding. And so when you think about 420 something million dollars every single day going to one particular demographic, like, do they have the best ideas? I'm sure they have great ideas. They're not representative of the types of solutions we need in every sector that we interface with on a daily basis, right? So I think venture is one of these areas where, based on where we are now, this is one career in which you sometimes need to jump in without having that mirror or having someone following someone who looks like you and has followed your journey, right? And so for me, bringing it back to culture, you know, I grew up in a household where humility and keeping your head down was so important, right? There was this fantastic belief in the system working, and the system like identifying your hard work, your blood, sweat, and tears, and rewarding it. And I'll tell you, I remember coming home from college and having my dad be so excited by telling us a story about something that happened at work. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he got a huge promotion, or maybe he got a raise. And his story is the owner of the factory where he and my mother had worked for 20 years, walked by and said, "Hey, Seuss, you're doing a great job. Is there anything you need?" And my dad was so proud to say, "No." When the owner continued to push him and say, "There's nothing you need. How about a raise? Do you need a raise?" My dad said, "No." And he was so proud to tell this story. And I was so angry. I remember, there was fire coming out of my ears and my nose. And I thought, "Dad, why would you say no?" And so that was a reminder for me that sometimes we grow up in a culture that doesn't allow us to raise our hand and say, "This is my dream. And and it's fair and okay for me to have this vision of abundance," right? So I have a 3-year-old. He loves bulldozers. And every time I just crouch down on the floor to play with him, I grab the bulldozer because it's a reminder to me of what my career has been, right? I'm a teen mom. I had a child at 17, and 75% of the adults in my life really signed me off. And so I went to college, which was unheard of, and really pushed through and powered through a career that, made me feel powerful enough to start to define my future, right? To Celi's comment. So once I realized, holy crap, I'm smart. and so I can do this. That is when, that is when the oyster really opened for me. So as I think about, advice to share, there are 3 things. So number 1, overpack. I just came back from an RV trip, And so I am a master overpacker, right? Much like a construction activity, I think this industry, particularly if you're building up your own firm, will take longer and be more expensive than you'd ever expect. And so overpack means like have all the tools that, gather as many tools as possible before you go on this journey to make sure that you attack it in the most strategic way possible. Number two, build your personal board of directors. I'm reading a book called Heart Boss by Reagan Walsh, and in it she talks about having your own personal board of directors and identifying who will play these key roles: your cheerleader, your sponsor, your mentor, your perspective shifter. Who will you go to when you need these particular pushes? And third, I think the MIT and the Sloan network are key here, whether it's classmates, professors, administration, programs. My partner and I have partnered with the MIT Sustainability Initiative for a subsidized summer internship, which will be incredible for us. So find a way to connect to your classmates. Those would be my three.
Thank you. And Noramay, thank you so much for that story. It so hits on how bias affects us because of the interpretation of white hegemony, right? So we know in America that the norm, when you say normal culture, what you're talking about is what middle-class white folks do. Straight middle-class white folks do, right? And that's what we mean by normal. And we all just try to fit it into, right? Like whether that's by straightening our hair or changing our name, right? Whatever it might be to make us more normal. But part of that is also undoing some things that are very important traits in culture for people, like humility, or like in my culture, this idea of respecting elders, right, is something that is major and ends up being interesting power dynamics sometimes for me, right? And it's not that these people aren't ambitious, or it's not that folks aren't those things, is that ambition doesn't show up like hey buddy, you're gonna get back, right? Like that's not how ambition shows up for every culture. But if that's how you have to show up in order for anyone to see you as ambitious, that's going to be a couple generations, right? I mean, like you said, it was one generation for you to look at it like, you should have told him universal basic income, what everyone deserves, right? Like whatever they can do. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that we all take that into not only from gender or race, but also intercultural, right? Religions and things like that really shape how we show up in the world. So I want to bring us now to a quick conversation, because we've been touching on this, and I want to get to the exciting part too about what folks can do and open it up for Q&A. So please be ready to type your questions in to that you may have. But we know bias costs. I mean, Julianne, you said, no one would ever say have one revenue stream, right? No one would ever say only fish in these waters. Yet for ideas, we only seem to fish in certain waters. And, when you define it, then you exceed it, right? I mean, it's almost like this vicious cycle. Can you talk to us a little bit about what we are losing by having this gender gap in investment?
Well, sure. And in fact, these are not my ideas, and it's not my research. So I'm happy to actually point everybody to a growing body of research done by, McKinsey, BCG, Morgan Stanley,
whomever. You can just get
right, exactly. A whole host of,
all
like
the ideas of
fringe entities you've never heard of.
What do the white boys at B&G say about us, Julia? What do they say they're losing?
Well, so here's the thing.
I'm joking.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like, these are bastions of the status quo, right? And they have done the research and said, in the case of Morgan Stanley, we are missing out in the US economy on over 4 trillion in opportunity because we have this hyper concentration. And again, very much to Noramay's point, it's not that we need to like, you know, get rid of all the white guys. It's that because we are so hyper concentrated, we are missing an enormous range of opportunities.
That's right.
And when we think about what that means, it has impact on finance, right? It has impact on our investments. So if you have a 401k, or if you have, you know, if you have investments you've made directly, or if you have someone, if you're fortunate enough to have someone managing your investments, that means that even if you're doing really, really well, right, against the benchmarks are themselves subpar. Right. And so what it really means is that we need to change our expectations. We need to raise them significantly. And that applies at MIT too, by the way, right? The MIT endowment has been extremely well managed and has outperformed its peers. And it's outperformed its peers in this context of overall underperformance, right? And if, you know, if there's one thing that unites us as an MIT community, it's that, you know, we are looking at data and we are constantly trying to do better, right? So, you know, no one would ever say, for example, in the physics department, you know, we've had a bunch of really big breakthroughs. We're done. You know, no one would ever say in Aeroastro, where I came from, yeah, you know, like we had a really big role in a bunch of stuff that happened in this space program.
The moon, high five, folks.
Yeah,
Let's go
like,
home.
We're good. We don't need to keep advancing the state of the art, because, you know, we're already the heroes, right? Like, there's no part of the MIT community where we would say, oh, we've done such a great job, and by the way, we've you know, competed so effectively, and we have become the leaders and the acknowledged you know, path breakers and innovators, and so, like, let's just stop. There's no part of the MIT life in which we would do that. And so, you know, particularly where we have the data, we have the evidence that we can do better. I think really, you know, it's not only incumbent on us to recognize that and seize that evidence, but also to, you know, act on the intellectual and innovative legacy that we all have inherited and carry forward, to find ways to make the most of not only the gap that's perceived, but the gap that isn't perceived yet, right? Like,
that's right.
Not only what we already know is there, but to really find our way beyond to what hasn't even been characterized yet.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you. I want to ask Celi, you know, is there anything else that, you know, that you think about when you think about what we're losing by not having the other half of the species in this field?
What are we losing? Lord, we are losing everything. I feel so passionately about this. We are losing generational wealth. If you look, 3% of VC funding went to women-led startups. That's less than 3%. Only 1% of VC funding goes to URM females founders, and less than 12% of females are decision makers at VC firms. I mean, looking at those statistics alone, you know, so much of funding for first-time startups comes from high net worth individuals and friends and family rounds. We don't tend to have those friends and family who are willing to dish out hundreds of thousands of dollars. That just doesn't exist. And if we are not part of these rooms, making decisions on what types of companies are invested in, and if we are not providing those first-time startup entrepreneurs with that funding, we are not providing the cycle of generational wealth that so long has not existed for people of color. So we need to show up, and I, along with a group of alumni of color, have started the Lab Fund, which was focused on providing entrepreneurs of color who are alums from MIT with the resources and financial support to maintain their businesses after they graduate. Because I know from my experience as an entrepreneur, that was not going to be a reality. We have loans, we have student debt, and we don't have that generational wealth to back us. So please check out the Lab Fund at labfund.com. Please reach out to me if you have any more questions, but I wanted to do a soft launch of that as part of our commitment to continuing to support people in the community.
You know, what I love about that too is I almost feel like it's a very, when we talk about the feminization of power, right? And Julianne, I've been called a hippie and a communist too. So, you know, I'm now gonna wear the feminization of power, but we say that, right? Women think about, and I'm not talking about the binary, I'm talking about energy, feminine energy, thinks about things different, right? Like it's more of a Kundalini energy, right? Versus a masculine energy, which is more of a contained energy. Again, not body parts, energy. And so, you know, I think even the way you're saying, like, we're going to come together and support ourselves, we're not going to wait for successful white men to get it, but we're going to come in and, you know, Kuju Shakalia it, right? And start doing cooperative economics to get us out of this lot. And we can make money on our own. And I so appreciate that agency. Noramay, before I kick it to you, I also want to throw out a statistic here that I think is really important for us when we're talking about 3% or 5%, right? All of these numbers. 75% of white Americans do not have one non-white friend. And so I want that to, so that means that a majority of folks who are friends with you now probably won't be friends with you later. And you're not going to have that network, right? That's what 3/4 of white Americans mean, right? 3/4 of MIT white folks might not keep in touch with us. And so I also want to throw that out to this group in the sense of, if we're talking about proximity, right? If we're talking about getting from 3% to 6%, how do we get there when 75% of them don't even have someone who looks like us in a group that they would call friends? So, you know, in thinking about us coming together to support ourselves, bravo on the fund. I think MIT should be giving to it. I think everyone else should too. But it's really an example of us needing to come together to support ourselves. So I'm so happy that that you did that, and we look forward to hearing more. The website is in the chat. So you can jump to that and start supporting it now. Noramay, we're going to get to you, and then we have a chat question.
Okay. And Malia, I want to say MIT shouldn't be, well, they can give to it too, but they should want to invest in it, because
oh yeah, when I say give, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. I did not, if let me be clear, and if anyone knows me, I do not believe in charity when we're talking about this stuff. I spent 20 years in the nonprofit industry and can tell you why I no longer believe in it. But so yes, when I said give, I meant support, invest. Thank you for that clarification.
For returns, invest for returns.
And invest for repair.
Yeah,
I think is also important, because there's 400 years that we need to make up for. And so some of that also needs to be not just about today, but about yesterday. Please carry on.
I think the notion of impact is at an inflection point right now. And there are many people wrestling with how to define impact for LP investments, how to define impact for venture investments, whether it's impactful enough to invest in diverse fund managers, or whether it's required that the diverse fund managers then invest in diverse founders. And so I think that the word impact is, and the notion of impact is certainly at an inflection point. I'll go back to your first question about what are we missing with this gender gap, because I think particularly in the sectors that I'm investing in, this is critical, right? When you think about food, who has historically created our food and flavors, right? This is women and people of color. And so if we're not including them in the food boom, if we're leaving them out, then we're leaving out these critical voices. And I can give you quick examples of how women, particularly women of color, are really redefining the next level CPG brands, right? The next generation of iconic brands you'll find at the superstore. There's a founder in Chicago, Petite, originally from Liberia, West Africa. The first, believe it or not, the first West African food brand in the US. Really doing innovative things in supply chain and the types of partnerships that are bringing this food to mass market. I think about Progeny Coffee in San Francisco by a 5th generation coffee farmer who moved to New York, was the first in her family to move to New York, went to Starbucks, had a $5 cup of coffee and said, WTF is this? My family is just making it, harvesting premium coffee. And how can this disparity exist? So she took this distribution channel of 11 different steps, cut it to 4, is paying farmers a more fair wage and delivering a premium coffee experience. Like, this is what women do. And so that's what we're missing by not investing in them. Both are raising their first round of capital. Both care deeply about who is on their cap table. And, I've heard them repeatedly say, I have options and I want to work with you. I want my cap table to reflect my values. So there's a movement on the founder side as well. Julianne, you know this well. Founders are finding their voice and saying, no, 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 yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Incredible power.
Yes, and I want to actually call back to an innovation conversation that we had with Natalie Molina Nino and Leandrew Robinson, and then another conversation that we had with Conda Mason, who's running the Jubilee Fund to support Black farmers down south. And what they said is they actually do turn down money, right? Because if you're not going to play the way they need you to play, then they don't need your money. And I think, when we're talking about things like traditional capital, I mean, you'll pour it out to anyone, right? And now we're saying, no, like, not all money is fine money, right? That we need money with conscience, we need money with patience. And Noramay, I want to keep you talking about that to really move us into, like you said, MIT should be investing, right? I think of Harvard's endowment and the conversation Harvard just had to have around their endowment. I think about the power that sits in elite institutions, not only through their faculty and students and brands, right, but also through the money that flows through those institutions. So can you help us focus on how MIT can be looking at how we as part of the MIT family can have these conversations with the power that we do have?
Yeah, so let's talk about the endowment, right? 18 or $19 billion has doubled in the last decade, returned close to double digits last year. And historically too big to focus on women-run or women-owned and diverse-owned firms. Anything under 100 million has been considered too small to really drive their attention. So, at a time when so many institutions are looking to have this vertical integration of values, right? So to be thinking about not only recruitment and retention, but also ensuring that their alums are thriving in the community and that they're putting their capital to work for the type of student body that is reflective of the world, then I think this is a time for the endowment to really step up and lead the charge. There are other universities around the country being pressured / inspired by their alums to take action, right? Stanford is having active conversations between the board, the management, the investment management company, and alums who are saying, hey, show us the numbers and give us a plan. And so there's interest. There are increasingly consultants and fund of funds who are saying, hey, if 25 million, 40 million, 75 million is too small, I can handle that as an intermediary. And so there are so many creative options for investing, even in a diverse owned fund of funds, who can then say, I'm going to take MIT, I'm going to take your 100 million and invest in these 10 firms, and you will instantly, have the investment in, I don't know, 200 portfolio companies who are deeply reflective of diverse founder base. I mean, that is impactful.
That's right. And with due diligence, right? I mean, I think what's so important about what you're saying is that, again, this isn't charity. That's what, sits in other places, right? This is the business part of that. And to me, equity and capitalism means we all making money together, baby. We all got some numbers in the game. So
yeah, and the research shows that emerging managers and first-time managers drive greater returns.
Say it again, Noramay, say it again, in case someone missed it.
The research shows that emerging managers, first-time and second-time fund managers drive greater returns.
So the numbers, again, right? Like we're talking about receipts here, right? And the receipts actually talk about, and again, we know that biologically, we know, right? Diverse ecosystems are more stronger. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to jump to grab a couple of audience questions because we had some pre-submitted. And so I always like to at least go to one pre-submitted question, and shout out to Andrew for sending them over to me. And this one I think is, well, there's a basic one, which is there a licensing required for fund managers, and are there any trainings that you would recommend? So does one person want to just take that question quickly?
Sure. So first of all, none of us are attorneys, and so you should not be taking legal advice on this webinar.
But we can suggest trainings. That's not legal advice, right?
Right.
We can suggest
that
trainings.
Said, whether you need a license or registration or certification depends entirely on the jurisdiction and the type of investing you're doing. And so again, no legal advice here. However, whatever kind of investing you're interested in, whether that's public or private, whether it's, early stage or late stage, whether it's, whatever it might be, absolutely what you really want to do is look at what is happening in that sector. And in every single sector, there are organizations and associations of practitioners, right? So in angel investing, there's the Angel Capital Association, right? In venture investing, there's the National Venture Capital Association, and there's New England Venture Capital Association, and there are other associations. And as Noramay is pointing out in the chat, there are more and more and more groups providing hands-on introduction and training into these various practica, excuse me. And so, there's Pipeline Angels, for example, and there are several others that provide a hands-on introduction so that you get the opportunity to see a due diligence process and participate in one, and you get to see how these things actually work, and you get to work through a term sheet, right? And you get to have a firsthand introduction. So absolutely, I encourage you, if whatever kind of investing you're interested in. Again, you can also do equity crowdfunding with, I think the minimums now are down to like
too far on this question because we have a couple more questions. So, so thank you for that. I also want to say, check out Ujima Project. There's also something called Decolonizing Your Term Sheet, and those will actually give you new ideas of how to do it and not just be doing capitalism in blackface, which is not helpful. Celi, I would love to turn it over to you to start us with this question. And this is going to be our last question. So we'll also have it be the closing remarks for everybody. And this is, how do you break into the industry or transition into the industry from a more traditional niche background, i.e. marketing for a large corporation? And Celi, we'll start with you, please.
Well, I also want to do a shout out to the VCI Fellowship for first time fund managers. That's one that we are a part of as the Lab Fund. And so they're great. They provide workshops and connect you to a larger network, and has been instrumental for our success. But again, when speaking and answering to that question of what you recommend pivoting from a non-traditional background, one thing that I would say is really reaching out to your network within MIT. There's a huge network here of fund managers, of individuals who can help point you in the right direction, and as well as taking advantage of the resources at Sloan, the academic resources. So there's lots of private equity, venture capital courses that you can take that provide you with the skills necessary to do due diligence, and taking advantage of any externships that you can do related to venture capital and private equity while you're at the institution. Those are two very key aspects to launching and pivoting into this industry from another one.
Thank you. Thank you. Noramay.
I'm so busy typing in the chat box, I missed your question.
No problem. It's written down. So that's what's great for me. So I don't even have to go back and look. How do you break into the industry or transition if you're from a more traditional background in large corporations like marketing or something like that?
Yes, thank you. So Julianne just popped in a link to Black VC in the chat room. There are certainly affinity group opportunities to break in. Black VC is running a mentorship program with current investors and prospective investors. Latinx VC, an organization I'm part of, is doing the same thing. And I'll tell you that 2020 was the year of hiring, the year of spreading job opportunities far and wide for venture capital. I had never seen so many opportunities being shared for firms bringing in new talent. And so these job email lists is pretty key, just in terms of learning about the new connections, and then the mentorship programs I think are pretty special too. Angel investing is always a great on-ramp. So joining a platform like Portfolio, like Pipeline, like Angeles Investors, where you can start to not only invest, but see the process at work. I think that's a great on-ramp.
Wonderful, wonderful. Julianne, would you like to add a final thought to on-ramps, transitions?
Yeah, I just want to refer back to a comment Noramay made earlier on about packing heavy. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's both and, right? It's both the case that there's a huge amount of opportunity that is completely untapped by the existing investment community, public and private alike. And also that for those of us who are coming from a different background, from a different identity, from a different vantage point, as Noramay said, it is a longer, harder process. And so you want to go into that eyes open. And if that means that you start off by doing investing as a side endeavor, and you sustain yourself with a full-time job until you can make the shift, so be it. We spent 5 years fundraising for ReInventure to get launched. That's not even uncommon if you're talking about a fund led by women and people of color. And so you just really need to know that this is what you're launching into, and go prepared, be prepared.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And girl, we can't see your nails. It's looking good. Come over. We'll do mani pedis, right? This is what Celi was saying, right? We need to support one another. So you come over, we'll do each other's manicures, keep each other looking good. But thank you. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for your candor. And thank you for just continuing to hold this space. I want to once again say that the Lab Fund is a great example of what we can do to fix the problem. Noramay and Julianne also are fixing the problems through their own funds. These are examples of women who are taking the solution into their own hands, and working to deploy capital in a more fair, equitable way, which turns out to be more profitable. And we here at Sloan we like those numbers too. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank the Affinity Group. I want to thank Yaskaida for calling me and asking me back. I appreciate doing this, and I appreciate all of you. So let's keep in touch with one another. It's been a hard week with the trial and Stop Asian Hate and everything. So let's hold each other's hearts dear. And let's keep holding and supporting one another throughout the weeks to come. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.